Well, shalom, dear friends, and welcome to our Bible study on the book of Genesis. Today we're going to be in chapter 9, which is kind of a continuation of chapters 6, 7, and 8. We're going to be right at the end of the great flood of Noah's Ark fame. But in our lesson for today, we are also going to introduce a new dispensation, which is to say, a period of biblical history in which mankind is given an opportunity to demonstrate his love for and faith in God by obedience. This is called a stewardship. And the word dispensation is oikonomos in Greek, and it basically means house laws. It's laws that God establishes for these periods of time. And man either shows his love and faithfulness or he shows his rebellion and his sinfulness. And I will tell you that the record of these dispensations throughout almost all of biblical history is a record of failures, but it's also a record of God's love for mankind, even though he sins and rebels. Even if man hates God, God loves man. And so really the whole Bible after the Garden of Eden is the story of God executing his plan of redemption through the seed of woman, through the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, to win mankind back to himself and to transform him so he will be suited for eternal life. So let's go ahead and dive right in here. The age that we have been looking at, or the dispensation that we've been looking at in chapters 6, 7, and 8, are called the age of conscience, because the main feature of this period of time is the fact that God used the human conscience as a communication medium, communication equipment. I have a tendency to think of my conscience as the cell phone that God has implanted in my heart and spirit so he can talk to me. But as we've said before, the problem with the conscience is it's vulnerable to other influences besides God. Not only can God speak to people through conscience, but he can also, Satan, fallen angels, demons, evil, wicked, faithless people can influence man's conscience and lead him down a path of destruction. So, we started this dispensation right outside the Garden of Eden with Cain and Abel and their interactions with each other. We got our red ribbon of redemption through the blood of Yeshua HaMashiach, going through the family tree of Seth, who kind of took Abel's place when Abel was murdered by his brother, through Noah, and then through one of the three sons of Noah, and the one is Shem. It's kind of hard to see that by this drawing, but Shem is the one God chose to bring the Messiah into the world. So today we are going to introduce the third dispensation, or the age of human government. I'm going to have a little bit more to say about that as this PowerPoint goes on and as our study of the text goes on. But basically, I guess the bottom line point I'll make about it is up until this point, until just after the flood of Noah's Ark, God was taking the responsibility for executing his laws, enforcing his laws that he placed on mankind. There weren't that many laws. They were just supposed to be fruitful and multiply, and Adam and Eve weren't supposed to eat from the forbidden tree. And basically, people were just supposed to obey the tenets of conscience, specifically those principles and guidelines and laws that God was communicating through a human conscience. So in this dispensation, we're going to be talking about human government, because at this point in human history, And I think it's probably because the population is, there was probably a kind of a population explosion going on. In the flood of Noah's Ark, God had destroyed the human population, and he starts it over with Noah's family. And so what is depicted here is Noah and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, populating. And they were supposed to be fruitful and multiplying. They were supposed to fill the earth, was one of God's criteria for fulfilling that commandment. But you'll notice in this picture that, like, although the people of the world came from these three families, they all had a tendency to kind of gravitate together instead of spreading out and populating the planet. And so that's going to give them some trouble with the story of the Tower of Babel, which we will read about in Genesis chapter 11. After the Tower of Babel, here they start to spread out and they populate the different continents. The Hamites, or the Hamitic people, would gravitate towards Africa and Arabia. The Shemites, or the Semitic people, would populate. Assyria is just kind of a general location for the Middle East. And Palestine, which is a term I don't like, it is derived from the ancient enemies of Israel, the Philistines. So when you, even today, when you talk about Palestinians, even the Palestinians claim descent from the ancient Philistines. They're not, of course. The Philistines were destroyed in David's day. But anyway, I prefer to call this the Promised Land, or Israel. And then you have the Japhetic, or in Hebrew it would be Japhetic people, who populated Europe and Asia Minor, which is Turkey. So you do see the populations eventually spread out. The reason they spread out was because God confused their languages, so that the Hamitic branch of the family tree spoke one language, but they couldn't understand the Semites or the Japhethites. And so that's why they spread out, just to be with people who were speaking a language that they could understand. So yeah, God is, at this point, God is going to institute a human government. Up until this point, God, he gave the laws, he enforced the laws, he executed punishment for breaking of the laws. But now he is, and I think because, like I said before, the population was growing to a size where God intends to involve human beings in the kind of oversight of human government. People in government, in human government, were supposed to represent God. They would be authorized by him to visit punishment on the lawbreakers, up to and including capital punishment. So that's the general idea of this age of human government. I will say, it almost sounds, and a lot of dispensationalists give you the impression that, like, after the age of innocence, there was no possibility of human innocence. And so, the age of human innocence doesn't count anymore. But it does. I mean, the whole rest of the Bible is about God's plan to make sinful man innocent once again, to deal with sin in his life through the blood of Messiah on the cross, and through his resurrection. Man by faith is made righteous, and then God embarks upon a journey with that human being for the rest of his life, to help him navigate the temptations and influence of sin in his life, so that at least potentially the power of sin can be overcome, and man can get kind of a secondary innocence. Human conscience takes the place of innocence, and you could get the impression that now that we have human government, God doesn't speak to us through our conscience anymore. But he does through all the rest of the dispensations, all the rest of biblical history and human history. He's still doing that today. After the age of human government comes the age of promise. And you could get the impression that once the age of promise was instituted, that God abandoned the idea of human government. He did not. Paul, the apostle, is still speaking about human government in Romans chapter 13. So yeah, it's easy. These charts and these divisions into various ages and dispensations and things like that are very helpful in understanding what God is doing going through the Bible, but they're also subject to misinterpretations and things like that as well. So because we are starting the third dispensation here, human government, I thought I would go ahead and read the study notes from the like the first edition of the Scofield Reference Bible. In the last study, I showed the full page that we're looking at now. We're kind of focusing in on the age of human government and the Noahic covenant here. But I think this is one of the best summaries of the age of human government. So I thought we would just read through it as kind of an overview. And I think that will help us navigate our way through the text for today. So the third dispensation is human government under conscience, which was the last dispensation, as in innocency, which was just Adam and Eve 2 dispensations ago. Man utterly failed. In the age of innocency, Adam and Eve failed because they ate from the forbidden tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Under the age of conscience, they also failed just because, Satan was not only tempting and gaining control of just Adam and Eve, but all of their descendants. And it got to the point where Noah and his family were like the only pure, that is thoroughbred human beings left. And the rest of humanity was pretty much a write-off. So God destroyed them and started over with the family of Noah. So the flood marks the end of the second dispensation and the beginning of the third human government. The declaration of the Noahic covenant, which we talked about in detail, which is down here at the bottom of the commentary section. The declaration of the Noahic covenant subjects humanity to a new test, or we could say a new stewardship or a dispensation, an oikonomos. Its distinctive feature is the institution for the first time of human government, because God was doing it himself before that. The government of man by man. Now, when it says the government of man, that does not mean man gets to make up his own government, although that's what he has done through the ages. The responsibility or the stewardship that mankind is given is to represent God in God's government. And so man is going to do the best he can to pass laws that reflect God's values and God's laws, and then is going to be given authority to enforce those laws. So yeah, the government of man by man. The highest function of government is the judicial taking of life. We call that capital punishment or the death penalty. And it says all other governmental powers are implied in that. Basically, what it comes down to is you can't drive your car over the speed limit because there is a body of civil laws that forbids that. And if you insist on doing it and you kill people, because you're driving over the speed limit, the ultimate punishment that human government can inflict upon you is the death penalty. Now, short of that, they can imprison you, they can fine you, they can, make you do community service or whatever legitimate powers of government are implemented. But the bottom line is the death penalty. Like an army, a nation's army would not have any power or influence at all if the other armies of the world didn't know that this army is willing to inflict capital punishment on you. Go onto the battlefield and kill all your soldiers. So capital punishment is the ultimate deterrence in human government. it's really I'm kind of interested in politics, so it's really tempting to go down a bunch of rabbit holes and talk about political things. But I want to talk about the spiritual biblical principle of human government. Let's see. It follows that the third dispensation is distinctively that of human government. Man is responsible to govern the world for God. So before, when it talked about the government of man, it's God's government that he has placed into man's hands to manage and oversee and to be a good steward of it. That responsibility rested on the whole race, Jew and Gentile, until the failure of Israel under the Palestinian covenant. Now, this takes the Palestinian covenant, I prefer to call it the Promised Land covenant, or the Holy Land covenant, or something other than Palestinian. I got no gripe against the Palestinian people. We have gone to Israel so many times and met so many wonderful Palestinians. Not fond of their government there in the Promised Land of Israel. So anyway, the responsibility rests on the whole race, Jew and Gentile, until the failure of Israel under the Palestinian Palestinian covenant, which is part of the Torah, Deuteronomy chapters 28 through 30 verse 10, I suppose, brought judgment of the captivities. And that's way in the future. That's the Assyrian conquest and the Babylonian conquest. When the Israelites got so bad, so evil, so wicked and sinful that God would not allow them to live in the Promised Land anymore. So, the northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians in 722 BC or BCE. And then the southern kingdom of Judah was conquered and exiled by the Babylonians about 586. It started in, I think, 606 BC or BCE. Let's see. The Palestinian government brought about the judgment of captivities when the times of the Gentiles began. And I disagree with that a little bit, because what he's suggesting is that the times of the Gentile, and that's a technical term, when God is basically going to turn the rule of earth, the rule of human government, over to Gentiles. Before, the nation of Israel had been included in that. After the Babylonian captivity, they're left out of government. They have not ruled themselves since, with the exception of the Maccabees, which will be an interesting subject if we ever get around to it. But anyway, so in other words, King Herod, the king of the Jews, was not even Jewish. So he doesn't count as a leader of Israel in God's reckoning. Okay, let's avoid the rabbit holes here, Bob. So, times of the Gentiles began after the Babylonian captivities, and the government of the world now is constantly in Gentile hands. Now, there's a series of Gentile governments. I think it begins with Egypt, then followed by Assyria, then Babylon, Medo-Persia, followed by the Greeks, the Romans, and then various manifestations of the old Roman Empire in various parts of the world, like the Eastern or Byzantine Empire and the Western branch of the Roman Empire, up until the times of the Antichrist. And Antichrist will, be the last of those Gentile governments until Israel gets back in the act during the millennium, or the kingdom age. Okay, let's see here. That both Israel and the Gentiles have governed for self and not God is sadly apparent. If you study the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and then 1st and 2nd Chronicles, that's the story of the age of kings, of Israelite kings. And that was a wicked bunch. And most of them were only interested in governing in their own self-interest and not for God. There are a few exceptions in the southern kingdom of Judah. But, when God gives the privilege of self-government to people, one of the biggest temptations is to use that authority and power for your own benefit, to get rich, to get powerful and influential, to kind of make war on your enemies, even if it's the other political party. The judgment of the confusion of tongues. Now we're going back to the Tower of Babel, which is Genesis chapter 11. Ended the racial testing. Now, the first time I read that, I had no idea what this was talking about, racial testing. But I did a little research and I figured out that what Scofield was talking about by the end of racial testing or racial stewardship was the period of time when both Jews and Gentiles governed themselves. So the entire human race governed itself. And Israel was authorized during the period of kings to govern itself. And there was even a form of government before the period of kings. But for simplicity's sake, we'll say during the period of the kings of Israel, the Israelites, the Hebrews, the Jews, had self-government. The Tower of Babel and God's judgment ended human government by the entire human race, where all people groups are included. That the captivities of the Jews while Gentile testing will, wait a minute. The judgment of the confusion of tongues ended racial testing. That the captivities, the Jewish opportunity and authority to self-govern ended with the captivities, while the Gentile testing will end in the smiting of the image. Now, this is a reference to Daniel chapter 2, and it's like the prophetic scenario until Christ returns. So what's being talked about here in this sentence is that Israel is not going to experience self-rule again until the Messiah returns. And the judgment of the nations, Matthew 25, 31 through 46, is the prophecy of the judgment of the sheep and the goats. That is the government. That's the judgment of the Gentile nations. Then it talks about the other 6 dispensations. There are a total of 7. So innocence is the first one, Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. Conscience up until Noah's Ark. The one we're studying now is not included in this list because here it is up at the top. Then promise will come after that. That's the age of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The law comes after that, and it's kind of a supplement to promise. Then comes grace. That's the age of Jesus Christ ruling in the hearts and lives of men. If Jesus' own people would have received him during his first advent, I think the kingdom, or the 1,000-year millennial kingdom, would have manifested almost immediately. Both John the Baptist and Jesus said the kingdom is at hand, the kingdom of heaven, the millennial kingdom. And then we're also going to encounter the Noahic covenant, the covenant that God made with Noah today. I'm going to pause the, well, I'll go ahead and do this now so we don't kind of break up the text. Okay. So what have we got here? Let me get my PowerPoint back. I messed myself up. And we'll go to full screen and go back where we left off. What I wanted to do, and I'll do this now, we've still got quite a bit of time to go through the text. Since we're talking about human government, I want to use as an example of a manifestation of human government among many kinds of manifestations, And to do this, I want to look at some historical documents of the American experiment in human government. And by that, I mean the United States of America. So what were the intentions of the pilgrims, the explorers, the people who came to the New World to start a new civilization? Well, the first thing we'll do is go to a document called the Mayflower Compact, which was written or at least sponsored by William Bradford, who was of the Plymouth Plantation, which was this is the Pilgrims. This is the Mayflower story of some of the first Europeans who came to this continent. And the dates here are 1620, 1647. And we've even got a reference to the author of the book from which this information is drawn. So the Mayflower Compact, I'm just going to read through it with you because I think it's revealing. The Mayflower Compact, we whose names are underwritten. So in other words, everybody who was on the good ship Mayflower. The loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James. Dread here, I think, means like awesome, in the sense of reverence and respect. Sovereign speaks of lordship. So does Lord. King James. The date here, 1620, kind of matches up with the date of the first King James Bible, which was 1611, which King James commissioned to be translated into English. So English-speaking people could read the Bible if they didn't know Greek and Hebrew, or really Latin in those days. By the grace of God, notice how many times God is mentioned here. By the grace of God, and this means that King James is king of England by the grace of God. And here's a list of all the territories that he ruled. Great Britain, naturally, but also France, Ireland. He's the king and defender of the faith. In England, the Church of England, which is now known as the Anglican Church, the King of England was like the leader of the Church of England. So he was the ruler. The Church of England didn't really have a pope, but they had significant leaders. So you could say the Church of England was one of the first Reformation churches, one of the first Protestant churches. So this is the church that's being referred to, and King James is said to be the kind of overseer of the church. He was responsible for the well-being of the Church of England. Getting back to the passengers, the pilgrims, having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. So why did they come to this hemisphere? Why did they come to the American continents? It was for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. These people were evangelists. They were not secular people. They were not only interested in, acquiring wealth in this hemisphere, on this continent. Their stated intention was the advancement of the Christian faith and the glory of God, and the honor of king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia. Well, they missed. Plymouth is in Massachusetts. But it was part of the Virginia, what was it called? Like the Virginia colony, I guess it was. And then it goes on to talk about all the, kind of the further purposes. But what I wanted to emphasize here is that these European people from Great Britain came to this continent to be evangelists, to reach the native population of this country with the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And nowadays, that's a real unpopular idea. This is proselytizing, which kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth. But in the Bible, proselytizing was like the best thing you can do. It's the Great Commission. So these people were following the Great Commission to bring the good news of the gospel to the people who lived on this continent. And of course, there were manifestations of sinfulness in the people who, the European people who settled here. But anyway, their intention was to come here and evangelize the place. So from 1620 to 1776 is what, about 150 years or something. We find ourselves in Congress on July 4th, 1776, the unanimous Declaration of the 13 States, United States of America. This is the Declaration of Independence, where we broke, where the people living in America broke from Great Britain. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, England in this case, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. Why did the colonists who lived in what is now the eastern United States, why did they separate themselves from Great Britain? Because they perceived that the government in England was wicked and would be judged by God. So their first responsibility was to make every effort to reform that government and make it pleasing to God. They tried that and failed. And most of the Declaration of Independence is a list of all the efforts that they made to reform the wicked government. Now, I mean, the big gripe that they had was they felt they were taxed unreasonably. And if you think about some of the wickedness that's going on in this country now, and they broke with their government over taxation and other things as well. It's a wonder there's not a civil war and a Declaration of Independence in this country right now. The country is so divided. And I suspect, this is not prophecy, but I suspect there may be another civil war coming in this country, unless Jesus returns, which would be wonderful. So, yeah, they're talking about the laws of their country and nature's God, which is the author of the laws of nature. And they believed if they didn't separate themselves from England, they would be judged for consenting to a government that God was going to judge. So no matter what it cost them, they wanted to be in good stead with God. So they separated from what they believed was an evil and wicked government that was inviting God's judgment. So here's kind of their foundational belief system. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are not products of evolution. They were created equal, and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Rights come from the creator, not from government. Our rights come from God. Okay. And it's interesting that this part about all men being created equal was written at a time when slavery was, the institution of slavery was going strong on this continent. There is a biblical basis for the institution of slavery, but not the things that were happening on this continent then. So here are these leaders, government leaders of this continent, basically saying all men are created equal, and this slavery thing is eventually going to have to go. And the Constitution of the United States made kind of a pathway for that to happen. Took another 100 years, almost 100 years. Civil War was fought over that. Okay, all men are created equal. They are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So somebody might say, well, what about abortion? Yeah, a good question, because every man, every human being is entitled to life, liberty, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Who instituted them? God did in Genesis chapter 9 and following up until now. So they realized that their authority to rule came directly from God, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And here's an important principle. I don't think it's spelled out in the Bible, but it is described in the Bible. So in other words, in the Garden of Eden, God gave Adam and Eve an opportunity to demonstrate their love for him and faith in him by obeying him and not eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And as long as they determined to do that, they were in a state of innocence, consenting to the government of God. But along comes Satan and tempts them to do otherwise. They eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then whose government did they consent to? Satan's, because he was speaking to them through their conscience, trying to get them to fail God and sin against God and rebel against God like he had, and he was successful. So Adam and Eve were thus ruled by Satan and consented to his government. Now, how could they get back? How could they get back under the government of God? Well, according to the Bible, the way you do that is you confess your sins and ask God to forgive you. And you believe in God and you live a life of repentance, inviting the Holy Spirit into your heart to give you a new birth and to enable you to live in obedience and love and faith to God. And then you're back under God's government. And that can happen to you and me right now. We are still in the age of the Gentiles, and Gentiles, which is going to be basically ungodly people, are ruling over us. And we're kind of forced to consent to their government. But one thing believers know is that when we consent to God's government, we're still obligated to obey the civil government. This comes from Romans 13. But not to the point where our obedience and submission to civil government requires to us to disobey God's laws. If that happens, we got to obey God rather than men. And you might say, well, if I do that, I might be executed by the human government. Yep, lots of Christians have made that choice, beginning in the Bible, and it's still going on today. So, yeah, let's go to our text finally here after almost 40 minutes, and we'll talk about some of these principles that we've just been discussing. So Genesis 9:1. So God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Well, where have we heard that before? Oh, that's what God said to Adam and Eve when he first created them. And he intended that Adam and Eve would remain holy, and they would conceive and give birth to children who were also conceived and born holy, and the whole human race would be holy, and they would live happily ever after, and the Bible would only be about 5 pages long. But they did the other thing, and so, they consented to Satan's government. So God embarked upon a plan to bring them back. And so our Bible is thousands of pages long now as we go through biblical history of God's plan of redemption to get us back. So the sinfulness of Adam and Eve and their descendants led to the flood of Noah's Ark. So God started the human race over with Noah and his family. And when they get off the ark, he gives them the same command he gave to Adam and Eve: be fruitful and multiply. This is talking about human sexuality. Husbands, love your wives in a carnal, kind of knowledgeable way, and have babies and love those kids and raise them up to have great values and spread out and populate and fill up the whole planet. Don't all congregate in one place. Fill up the planet. And the fear of you and dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth. Fear here can mean a lot of different things, but this is the Hebrew word yirah. Yirah is a verb. The noun version of it has a mem or an im sound at the beginning, so it's morah. So the fear of God. So this is being afraid. But it also has a hint of reverence. in it. Dread is the Hebrew word chat. And this is a rarely used word, I think, in the Bible, and it means fear too. It may also have that idea of reverence or respect, you might say. So the fear of you and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the earth. Now, that may have been true before, because man was given dominion over all the kinds of animals. Land animals, sea animals, birds, air animals, on every bird of the air, and on all that move on the earth, and on all the fish of the sea. They will be given into your hand. Now, Noah's descendants were to have dominion over them, and domesticate some of them, to use them as laboring animals to help plow the fields and provide transportation and things like that. But here, it looks like the animals are going to be especially fearful of you from this point on, and we'll see why in verse 3. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I have given you all these things, even as the green herb. So up until the aftermath of the flood of Noah's Ark, mankind was a vegetarian, and all the animals were vegetarians too. That was the initial plan. And maybe, since God's plan of redemption seems to be targeted at bringing us back to the Garden of Eden, we may one day return to a vegetarian diet. For some of you, that'll be good news. For some of you, that'll be bad news. But humans and animals were vegetarians up to this point, but now the animal population is given for food, so you can eat meat. And it says, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. So according to this, are there any types of animals that are off limits? Now, when the law of Moses comes, there will be some things that are off limits, like hogs. Hogs were off limits just because they weren't kosher. They didn't meet the definition of clean animals. Cleanness of animals has to, and this is the idea of a kosher diet. Kosher is the Hebrew word that means kasher. We'll say it means clean animals that are permitted to be eaten. That has more to do with suitability for sacrifice than it does for any health advantages or disadvantages of different kinds of animals. So when the law of Moses came, you couldn't eat ham or pork or bacon, stuff like that the Gentiles all love. So this was to separate the Jews from the Gentiles, the Israelites from the Gentiles. But here it looks like everything that you can tolerate eating, you're allowed to eat. And eventually, when the new covenant comes along, God breaks down the kosher regulations and says, since you're going to be going out and evangelizing the Gentiles, eat what they eat. Don't separate yourself from them for food reasons, because that might hinder their salvation. Okay. Verse 4, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. The word life here is the word nephesh in Hebrew, which technically means the soul. What is the soul? It's the feelings, the emotions, the passions, the things that drive behavior. And the reason your soul has all these feelings is based on what it believes to be true, which is a function of the human spirit or the mind. So if you listen to God, if God is speaking to you in your conscience and you only listen to him, you can discern his voice from Satan's. Satan, you don't want anything to do with Satan, so you don't even listen to him, but you live your life, according to God's rules. Then your spirit will have a belief system upon which your soul, your nephesh, will react with feelings and emotions and passions and lust and and various other capabilities that it has. And those things, those feelings will drive your behavior, will drive you to action. And this is another rabbit hole that I'm really tempted to go down, but that's as far as I'm going to go with it. This kind of life is soulish life or nephesh life and not spiritual life. So when you eat animals, animals have an animalistic soul. It's based mainly on instinct. I think, some of them have some brain power, so they can, look at things. They can sense the environment through their senses and come to conclusions about it. So that's how they know to fear you and have reverence and awe for you. But the source of this soulish life is the blood of those animals. And God is saying here, I'm going to let you eat those animals, but do not eat the blood. Don't consume the blood, because that is the source of this animalistic life. So why would God not want people to consume the blood? Because he doesn't want them to be like animals. He doesn't want them taking that animalistic nature, that passionate, lustful, very desirous, very emotional, driving kind of life that animals have. It's basically a survival instinct for animals and a feeding instinct for survival. So God doesn't want you taking that in you. Now, let me do a little parenthesis here. It's interesting that when Jesus, in the Last Supper, the last Passover meal, Pesach, Seder, he takes bread and he takes wine and he says to his disciples, "This is my body, this is my blood. Take this and eat it. Take this and drink it. Drink this blood," he says, "in remembrance of me." So it sounds like he's telling us to violate this principle of not consuming blood. But the reason we don't want to consume animal blood is we don't want to become animals. But we do want to become like the Son of God. We do want his soul, his passions, his emotions. We want all that stuff operating in us. Now, if we have that, of course, we want to have his spirit also in us. That will be kind of fueling the nephesh of Christ that will be in us. So it's okay to drink his blood. Don't drink animal blood. Don't drink human blood, but drink the blood of the Son of God. Eat the flesh of the Son of God. And of course, it's not cannibalistic eating. Like Jesus didn't rip off a finger and hand it to Peter and say, "Eat this finger." In fact, in John 6, when he's describing what he means by consuming his body and blood, he says, "My words to you are spiritual. They're not literal, materialistic." But ironically enough, the early Christians were persecuted because people believed they were cannibals, because they heard about this idea of the Christians are getting together and eating human flesh and drinking human blood. So it got them in trouble. Okay, verse 5. "Surely for your lifeblood, I will demand a reckoning from the hand of every beast. I will require it, and from the hand of man." So what this is saying is that your life and my life are so precious to God that if someone or some animal uses their free will to take your life from you, like to shed your blood so that you die, there needs to be a just punishment for that. So if an animal does it, the animal's going to die. If a human being does it, the human being is going to die. So this is kind of the beginning of the idea of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, which seems kind of barbaric and kind of gross from some perspectives. But what that actually is a limitation on the kind of reciprocity or the payback that you can do. So if somebody pokes your eye out, you can't cut their head off and still be in God's good graces. what you would need to do in that case is go through a legal process where it is determined that that person actually did cost you one of your eyes, the sight in that eye. And so the reasonable punishment would be to poke their eye out. What usually happens is kind of the mob or the gang mentality where, this gang kills one of the other gang, so that gang comes back and kills 5 of the first gang and stuff like that. This is an attempt to prevent that from happening. From the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man. And this is kind of literal, because if, like in biblical days, if somebody killed my brother Mark, I'm his brother, so I would be the one responsible for executing justice, for bringing that guy that killed my brother to justice. That person was called the kinsman redeemer. But he's also the avenger of blood. So, I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. So in our PowerPoint, we were talking about capital punishment, or the death penalty, being the ultimate power and authority of government. And so God is saying, I'm going to take that power and authority and the privilege of capital punishment that only I've had up until this point, and now Noah and Noah's sons and your families, I'm giving it to you, and deal with it responsibly. Your laws should reflect my values, God says. Your punishments should be appropriate to the crime, but wield the sword on God's behalf, and he will bless you for your efforts. Verse 7, as for you, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply in it. So just a repeat of the be fruitful and multiply. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons, saying, and as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your descendants after you. So this is the Noahic covenant. And the details are about to be shared with us. Verse 10. And with every living creature. So the Noahic covenant is with Noah and his family and all of his descendants, but also with all the creatures that survived the flood, the birds, the cattle, every beast of the earth, with you, of all that go out of the ark, every beast of the earth. You can eat them for food. That is a legitimate use of animal life. And then also you can punish them if they hurt you or kill you. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. So God has done floods twice. The first one was in the aftermath of Lucifer and the fallen angels' rebellion against him, and the demonic rebellion against him. The earth was flooded. The Spirit was hovering over the surface of the waters. Darkness was over the face of the deep, and so forth. So that's the first universal flood. This one here in Genesis 6 through 9 is actually 8 is the second one. And God says, I'm never going to do it that way again. He will judge the earth by fire, but not by a flood, never again. And God said, this is the sign. Hebrew word is ot, which is a sign. It sounds like the word oath, but it doesn't mean that. It's a sign. And this sign is going to be a physical one, which will be seen in the heavens. This is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I will set my rainbow. The Hebrew word here is kashet. Is kashet? I thought it was kasha. Kashet. This is the word for a rainbow, but it's also the word for like a bow and arrow, a bow that you shoot an arrow with. So what's the connection there? It's the curvature. When you see a rainbow, you see a curve. When you say a bow that shoots an arrow, you see a curve. And so you may say, well, that's a cheesy connection. And there's lots of them in the biblical languages. But I'm sure that's where the idea comes from. When you see a curve in this, a colorful curve in the sky, that can remind you of a bow and arrow, but it can also remind you that that is a sign of the covenant God made with you and all life on earth. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign for the covenant between me and the earth. Now, in our day and age, the rainbow has been usurped. It has been, I don't know a good English word for this. It's kind of been taken captive, and it has been turned into a sign, an oath of the LGBT and however many other letters there are, the homosexual and transsexual, the gender issues community have taken the rainbow from themselves. And that irritates me because God established the rainbow as his sign of his grace and his promise not to destroy us until it's absolutely necessary. And here it has been taken over by this group whose sins the Bible characterizes not only as sins, but toeva, which is an abomination. So this is kind of a counterfeit and a mockery, this gender use of the rainbow as their symbol. It's a counterfeit and it's a mockery of God. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud. I am one of the privileged people who used to be a military aviator. So my career, my job, my everyday job was flying the fighter planes. And so when the conditions are right and you fly kind of above the clouds, you can see a 360-degree rainbow. And it is absolutely gorgeous. And what a reminder of God's power and his grace and just the beauty of his creation. Usually when you see rainbows from the perspective of the earth, you only get to see half of it. You just get to see the bow part. But they actually do manifest in a 360-degree circle. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud, and I will look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. So this is an everlasting covenant. The Hebrew word there is olam, which doesn't always mean everlasting. Sometimes it means a lengthy period of time. Like we talk about the age of human government. That is an olam. It's a period of time, a lengthy one, but it's a period of time. And even the age of innocence is an olam. Olam, what would it be? Naki, olam naki. Would be a very short period of time. But here, I think this is an everlasting covenant. God is never going to go back. He's never going to flood the earth again. He will judge it by fire, but never again by flood. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I've established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Some of this sounds a little bit repetitious, but repetition is done for emphasis in the Bible. Like when God said to Adam and Eve, in the day you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, in the day you eat of it, you will die. He said die twice. I think it's mot yamut. So it's an absolute form of the verb to die, and then like an imperfect expression of that, yamut, dying, you will die, is kind of literally what it says. So the repetition is for emphasis. Sometimes Jesus says, truly I say to you, amen ani omer lecha. But sometimes he says, truly, truly, I say to you, amen, amen, ani omer lecha. And when he says it twice, listen up, because this is more important than just one amen. Now, the sons of Noah who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And again, I think the order here is not birth order. Shem is the middle son, Japheth is the oldest, and Ham the youngest. But I think this order is Shem is put at the beginning because he is the one through whom that red ribbon of redemption runs through. He's the family that's going to be blessed to bring the Messiah into the world. And Ham was the father of Canaan. Canaan was the name of Ham's son, so it would be Noah's grandson. And this makes it sound like that maybe Canaan was born like right after the ark, or he may have been born on the ark. It doesn't really tell us, I don't think, when he was born. Shem was 100 years old 2 years after the flood. But these other guys, like, it's hard to tell when children were born to them. And, the wives may have conceived during the time of the ark. But anyway, so we don't know how old Canaan was or if he was even born at this time. What we do know is that eventually he did become a significant descendant of Ham. Canaan, interestingly enough, is the name of the land where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived before that promised land became their possession in the days of Joshua. So none of them lived to see like their family's ownership of that land, but they took God at his word, and their faith was credited to them as righteousness. But this is the branch of Ham's family tree that settled that part of it's called the Levant, what became the promised lands. And when Joshua conquered that land, he was fighting Canaanites. He was fighting people from his own family tree. Well, not really. I mean, Joshua was a Semite or a Shemite, and Ham was one of the other sons. And again, they settled mainly in the African continent. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. Which makes it sound like Noah and his wife didn't have any more kids after the flood. And Noah began to be a farmer, and he planted a vineyard, a kerem. Then he drank of the wine and was drunk. Yain is the Hebrew word for yain, for wine. Some people make a big deal out of the word, what is it, terosh? That is also a reference to wine, but it is often interpreted as a non-alcoholic one. This is grape juice. So some denominations, including the one that I favor now, and I attend a Assemblies of God church, they're one of the denominations that makes a big deal out of terosh being grape juice. And so all of the communion wine that they serve as grape juice. It's non-fermented, or at least it hasn't fermented much yet. The thing about grapes is if you crush the grapes to get the juice out, they start fermenting like right now. And of course the fermentation continues. Now, I mean, if you're a winemaker, you can add stuff to it to, I suppose, increase the rate of fermentation. But I mean, anyone who has ever used grape juice in Holy Communion knows that you have to refrigerate that grape juice or it hardens, it ferments and turns into wine. So you have to keep it in a refrigerator. And the refrigerators in Noah's day did not work all that well. So these people who argue that like the communion wine at the Last Supper, which would have been in the like March, April time frame in the spring, they say that was grape juice, that was terosh. Well, it couldn't be, because the grape harvest in Israel happens in the fall of the year. So you've got like 6 months transpiring between the grape harvest and the Passover, and no refrigeration. So believe me, any kind of fruit of the vine that was used in a Passover meal was always fermented. It was always alcoholic. So yeah, anyway, so Noah planted a vineyard, he drank the wine, and he was drunk. Sakar is the Hebrew word for like drinking too much. Just drinking is shatah, which is fine. And, like I say, biblical era people drank wine and considered it a blessing from God. It was, it tasted good. It, made them feel good like any alcoholic drink does. But there was also a dangerous side. You could easily become addicted to it. You could become a drunk, ruin your reputation, ruin your family relationships, and so forth. So the Bible does not forbid the consumption of alcoholic beverages, but it does warn very sternly against overindulgence and becoming an alcoholic. So yeah, he drank the wine, he was drunk, and he became uncovered in his tent. Well, what does uncovered mean? Tagal. Gal, I think it's probably galal. No, gala. Like in this context, it means he took off his clothes. And one of the commentators that I read said that when you drink too much alcohol, it makes your body warm, like it heats up. And so Noah would have been uncomfortable in his clothes. So he probably took them off and cast them aside and probably collapsed on his bed, his mitah, and passed out, went to sleep in his tent, his ochel. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. And you get the idea here that, like, Ham might have gone in to check on his dad or something, and there he is laying on his bed naked, and he's humiliated, and Ham mocks him. He doesn't cover him up. He doesn't, keep his father's embarrassing secret. He goes out and tells his brothers. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, we'll say a blanket, and laid it on both of their shoulders and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. So what they did was they took a large garment. It could be like a ma'il, like a coat, or like a poncho like people wore in those days. They took one of these and they went to all the trouble of holding it behind them. Like, so they would be facing this way and they're holding this ma'il, so it's behind them, or this blanket, so it's behind them. Both of them side by side, right? And they back into the tent where they know their dad's bed is. And without looking at him, they cover up his body. They cover his embarrassment, his frailty, his sinfulness. This is a wonderful expression of respect for their father. Ham was just the opposite. He couldn't wait to tell somebody. He couldn't wait to laugh at his dad. And these two guys went to great lengths to cover their dad's nakedness, and they did this in respect. Their faces were turned away and they did not see their father's nakedness. So a great contrast there. So Noah awoke from his wine, and he knew what his younger son had done to him. So maybe he was kind of semi-conscious through the whole thing, or maybe God told him. But at any rate, he knew what Ham had done, had him dead to rights. So then he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brethren." Now, if Noah's doing this right, and he has the kind of relationship with God that we would all like to have, he would not have pronounced this curse upon his grandson unless God had said, "This is what I'm going to do." Remember, this is the age of human government, where people in authority, like a father in a family, are supposed to rule on God's behalf. So this isn't just Noah being angry with his son, with the way his son treated him. This, I think, is a prophecy, and it comes to pass. in history. Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants. He shall be to his brethren. Who are his brethren? Well, it's going to be the Shemites and the Japhethites. What did the Shemites do to the Canaanites when they conquered the promised land? They destroyed them. They killed them, every man, woman, and child. They killed their animals. Yeah, so it was a severe judgment from God, and it's being predicted right here. And he said, blessed be Yahweh, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. So Canaan, the son of the youngest son of Noah, is always going to be the servant of the Shemites. So the Africans, always going to be a servant to the Shemites and the Japhethites. So, and when I see this word, Lord, I know that it is this in Hebrew. Yud, He, Vav, He are the consonants. The vowels that appear here, which are the little dots and the little T-shaped thing, and then the little dot above the letters, those are not the vowels for Yahweh. The reason these vowels are here, these are the vowels of another word, Adonai, which means Lord. That's why it says Lord in our English Bibles. Now, if you see the word Lord with a capital L and a lowercase O-R-D, that is Adonai. But if you see it in your English Bible with a capital L and then a capital O-R-D, but kind of a smaller font here, that is the divine name. That's the sacred name, Yahweh. Now, on the one hand, I think God revealed his name for us in the Bible, and you can know how to pronounce it. When my book, about Nazarene Essene theology comes out, I have a whole spiel about, what the name Yahweh means, what the vowels. You can kind of, what do you call that? Reverse engineer that from what we know from Scripture and determine what the vowels are. So it, almost certainly was pronounced Yahweh. The one consonant we're not sure of is whether this Vav here, the third letter, was pronounced as a V sound or a W sound. So some people say Yahweh, some people say Yahweh. And I even make a case in that book for why that letter Vav was pronounced as a V sound. So we can know how it's pronounced. But the reason these vowels were substituted for the authentic vowels for Yahweh is an effort by the Jewish people, and this would be after this would be during the Second Temple era. Sometime, it probably originated sometime around after the Babylonian captivities. In my book, I use the year 270 BC because that's when the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, was published. And it uses the word kurios here, which is the Greek word for Adonai, Greek word for Lord, rather than some attempt to give a Greek version of God's name. So that practice started before the days of Christ. It was well known in the days of Christ. If Jesus did not want Yahweh's name to be pronounced, he could have said something about it. But the fact that he didn't apparently do it, apparently he didn't use the sacred name himself. And when his apostles write, they talk about kurios all the time. They talk about Lord all the time. But I don't think there are any instances where there's like a Greek version of the sacred name Yahweh. So yes, we can know the name, but we can also choose to not pronounce it out of respect for that name. And that basically originates from the commandment that says, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain. Now, when I'm teaching the Bible, I don't feel like that is using his name in vain. Or when I pray to him, if I pray to Yahweh or to Yah, a shortened form of it, I don't think that's disrespectful. But I mean, you know, how many times you hear people say God and, you know, Jesus Christ in a just a casual, even you know, inappropriate, foul language kind of way. And using this, it's called a circumlocution, saying Lord instead of saying Adonai instead of Yahweh. Um, uh, it's a hedge around the law. It's an attempt to, you know, keep yourself from. How did I go to Genesis 1:1? Good grief. Let's go to Genesis 9, and I'll have to find our verse. I'll say verse 10 here. Okay, let's go back here. Where is the sacred name? So anyway, what I'm saying about the sacred name is you can know what God's name is and use your own judgment about, you know, whether you should use that name, whether you should speak that name or not. I will tell you that if you have any Jewish friends and you go around saying the sacred name, you say Yahweh, they will be offended. They will be offended because to them, that, you know, that is a violation of Jewish culture and a Jewish tradition, the tradition of the elders. So there's my little spiel about the divine name. It's such a wonderful name. It is based on the verb of being, hayah, which means to exist or to live. Chava actually is more the idea of living than existing, but this would be a hifil form of that verb, which is causal, and it's an imperfect verb, which means it's not a completed action. So it reflects an ongoing existence and being the cause of all things. So knowing what Yahweh means just paints pictures for me. It's a glorious name, and I would never even consider taking it in vain, using it casually or something like that. It's a wonderful name. But you know, just be aware of who you're talking to, and they might be offended by that. I think some Christians might be offended by that as well, although there are translations of the Bible that use Yahweh or Yahweh. So yeah, blessed be the Lord Adonai, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Yafet. And when you look at the areas like Europe and like Northern Asia, and now, you know, the North and South American continents, the Yafethites really have enlarged their dwelling places. And may he dwell in the tents of Shem. Now, I think what this means is that the Shemites are going to be the ones that bring the Messiah into the world. So the gospel is intended to go first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles. And Jesus came in his first advents almost exclusively to the Jewish people. He commissioned his followers, the apostles, to go out and make disciples of all nations of the Gentiles. And the Gentiles have joined the church. So according to Paul in Romans chapter 11, when Gentiles become believers in Yeshua, in Jesus, they are grafted into the tree of Israel. So in other words, they're living in the tents of Shem. So I think the evangelization of the Gentiles in the age that we live in now is a fulfillment of this prophecy. So many Gentiles have joined the Jews in believing in and worshiping and following their Shemite Messiah, and may Canaan be his servant. And by the way, you know, this curse on Canaan, I don't think has anything to do with skin color. And a lot of people, you know, try to make it sound like, you know, God inappropriately cursed the Canaanites, the descendants of Ham. They have dark skin, and, you know, they have suffered the consequences of that ever since, and that's not fair. This doesn't have anything to do with skin color. What does it have to do with? It has to do with Ham's behavior. And Ham may have been a white guy. We don't know what color he was. We don't know, in all probability, the Africans have darker skin color because they live in a very sunny, hot population. So, the marvelous body of human beings allows them to adapt to that somewhat. So Canaan, and in fact, I think the Canaanites probably were white people. So Canaan and Ham may have been white people. This doesn't have anything to do with being black. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. So all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. That sounds pretty old, but he's not the oldest guy who ever lived. That would be Methuselah, 969 years. Adam lived to be 930. So, people are still living long lifespans here, but the lifespans are going to get shorter. So we talked about, the changes in the angular velocity or the rotation speed of the Earth. I still hold to that. I think that's a good attempt at an explanation for these long lifespans. And also it explains the waters above the firmament and the fact that those waters don't exist now since the flood of Noah's Ark. So that's the end of chapter 9. Chapter 10 is a genealogy. And so I think chapter 10 is going to be probably kind of a short video, but there'll be some interesting things that we will look at. And the genealogy from chapter 10 is going to tell us where all the people groups, even modern day people groups, came from and where they settled. We'll be looking at some maps of where those people groups, where the various family trees and branches of the family tree, where they settled, where they lived. So maybe some stuff about their culture and things like that. We'll address that next time, but I kind of hope it'll be a short chapter. I said before in chapter 5, when we looked at the genealogy there, usually when I counsel people about how to read the Bible, I just tell them to skip over the genealogy. But there's some interesting things here too, so we will take a look at that. Let me give you the priestly blessing from Numbers chapter 6. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you with favor, or lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. In Hebrew, that would be Yivarechecha Adonai vayishmarecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yuchnecha, Isa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem leka shalom. See you next time, dear friends.